Welcome in, Heart Talkers, to another episode of Heart Talk. I'm your host, Laura Lawrence. And you know, if you've been in this community for a while, that this is a podcast where we share everyday stories of everyday people. And I am so excited and honored to have Dr. Alisha Rai sitting heart to heart with me today, talking about finding joy and hope in a life redefined, in her words, and the power of perseverance and courage to overcome adversity. So, after spending 5 years of her life navigating the journey of infertility and loss, the day her son Aiden was born, such a sweet little soul, Dr. Rai became a disability advocate and the face behind hope for cerebral palsy. I am a firm believer, Dr. Alisha, that we meet people at the right time in the right space in our life, and that there's almost this like divine synchronicity that brings us to crossing people's paths. And so I'm so happy that our paths have crossed and that we've met in person.
Mhm.
And I want to welcome you to Heart Talk today. I'm so happy that you accepted my invitation to come here.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I firmly believe the same thing, that there's people that come into your life for a reason, and there's always purpose behind these interactions that we have.
Absolutely. And so let's start where I start with all of my podcast guests. Tell us a little bit about who is Dr. Alisha Rai?
Dr. Alisha Rai is just Alisha. I always say I am a wife and a mom, a daughter, a sister. I would often say in the Canadian context, I'm a South African immigrant,
Mm.
um, which happens, and who happens to be a physician.
So there's so many layers to who
So
Alicia
many layers.
is.
Yeah.
Isn't that so? When somebody asks, like, who are you? I mean, it just depends what stage of life.
I know, and that's why I had to take a minute. I was like, "Ooh, who am I?" It's such an important question, and I mean, like you've highlighted, I think when we go through a lot of challenges and adversity, it is such an important question to go back to ground zero. Who
Mhm.
am I? Because I found with just my experiences, there were times that I started to question my worth and my value, and I had to go back to ground zero and being like, wait, who am I? What is my value? What is my purpose? And not allowing adverse situations to shape how I saw myself.
Yeah, I love
So,
that.
yeah.
And I think I was just having this conversation with another female the other day. I think, and I'm not going to say this is just for women, but I think it's particularly true for many women that as we go through new ages and stages of life and we step into different roles and identities, we kind of lose a little bit of who we were, and have to go back to that. Who am I without my career? Who am I, if I'm not a spouse or I'm not a mother? And today we're going to talk a lot about that 5 year journey of navigating infertility and loss, and then where that took you to today. Because I think so many women listening are really going to identify with many layers to your story. But let's go back to that you are a South African, you were South African born. Yeah. So tell me a little bit
Mhm.
about that.
So yes, my background is Indian, but my parents are South African Indians. I am a fourth generation South African. And so I grew up in a country that was under apartheid or post-apartheid, for I think majority of my life thereafter. But that definitely shaped a lot of how I saw myself. I lived in a country that disliked me because of the color of my skin, that limited possibilities and options because of the color of my skin. And so many times when I come up against adversity, especially now being in my 40s and in Canada, I'm like, I trained my whole life for this. This is easy. I've had to deal with rejection and judgment most of my life.
Wow. Yeah. So it's not something new for you. So tell me about that because for somebody like me, you know, privileged, not having to face much adversity at all when it comes to the color of my skin or being, preconceived notions about my status, my ability. So I'm always very fascinated when I have these conversations. But what it was like navigating that as a woman of color, because you stepped into some spaces that also aren't traditionally female dominated spaces.
You know, and that's true. I often say, I think there I would give credit to my parents because them having grown up under the apartheid system for all their lives, really, my mom was very empowering in that they never limited us into allowing us to believe what was said about us, but
Mhm.
encouraging us to dream and to push boundaries. And so me saying I wanted to study medicine, it was like, okay, and how are we going to make this happen? One, not because, obviously going into medicine is expensive.
Mhm.
And being able to say, well, how do we get around this? And then having to, I applied for a scholarship. And even with that, being the first woman of color to be accepted into the South African military to study medicine was also, a new challenge. But again, I think my confidence in who I was as a person was so ingrained just as being brought up in a home where my parents really valued who we were and taught
Mhm.
us that we're more than our skin color. We're
Wow.
more than what people think about us or more than what people say about us. So there I really value what my parents, my mom and dad imparted in us.
Wow. Yeah, the depth of those family roots and that encouragement and that belief from the people who love you the most that like you can break barriers, you can blaze
Yeah.
trails. So you've been doing that for a very long time.
Yeah, and so that's why I often joke when I now come up against no, that can't be done, or no, that's not possible for Aiden. I'm like, no, we are going to push through and we're going to find the yes, it is possible, or yes, we're going to somehow make this happen. So that's why I joke and I say I've trained my whole life, and it's the same with my husband. My husband, um, he is mixed. So his dad is Irish and his mom is South African colored. And they actually met in South Africa. His dad came on missionary work into South Africa. And they met and they had to run away to Namibia to get married because it was still illegal and a crime for them to marry. So their kids, they have had four children, were all crimes. And so if they were ever caught in South Africa, his mom would have been imprisoned. And so they left South Africa and moved to Namibia. And so it's wonderful that I have a husband who understands that aspect of it. And so we often have conversations about being judged or coming up against criticism. And and so we always say, yeah, we know how to handle this and being able to then from our experience, being able to advocate for Ada.
Yeah, so really turning pain and experience and adversity into purpose.
Yeah, yeah. And
Yes.
I mean, just the difference with us is where we were judged on skin color, where Aiden he's a little white boy, but he would be judged on his ability and disability, which is a different ball game, but I think the principles remain the same. And so for us to entrench his values, his inherent worth as a person beyond abilities.
Yeah, I love that. And I think when we were talking prior to coming on, I'd shared with you that my oldest daughter had gone to school with a boy named Liam. and his mom, and her story is featured in my book, Behind Closed Doors. And her story also one of adversity and being a single mother and almost losing Liam in childbirth and the adversities that he had. And I just saw him the other day. And I mean, that boy's now in first year engineering, and he never sat out at any, play day or sports day. And just to see the kids kind of wrap their arms around him, because kids are beautiful. They love with their whole heart. And so I've had the opportunity through my daughter to be able to kind of have some of those experiences of seeing how, adversity can be overcome. So let's talk about the emotional roller coaster that both you and your husband experienced in those 5 years leading up to the birth of Aiden. That emotional roller coaster of challenges conceiving, miscarriages, infertility, because that's something that's not often talked about.
No. And that really brings in that component of feeling isolated and shamed. Because here's the thing, as a woman, you're taught about not getting pregnant. Well, we're not taught about fertility preservation and what family planning looks like, and the possibility that you might find yourself in this situation. And so I think that was a thing for me that I really struggled with in the beginning. Is I thought, I never thought I would find myself in the situation. It was almost as if I took for granted the gift and the blessing it is to have children. And that for me in the beginning was so difficult. Was, how is this my experience, and what did I do wrong? Why is this happening to me? And so, in the beginning, you think, okay, this is just, it's a matter of time. It's just we just got to keep trying. And then when you soon come to the realization where actually we're facing a little bit more than just, this is just not working out, that having to, navigate that really, really makes you dig deep.
Mm-hmm. So what kind of toll did it take on your marriage, on your relationship?
I must say, in that time, I have a really amazing husband, really, really good husband, that whatever I needed, he was there for. So if I had said at any stage, look, I think this is enough, we're going to stop trying, he was okay with that. And so I feel in many ways when it came to our experience, I felt really fortunate to have a husband that was supportive and just encouraging every step of the way. So in terms of during the time with the fertility, I felt like that was such a bonding experience for us, because this was us trying to build our family. And initially it was the want to have biological children, but it was something we spoke about prior to getting married, thinking, okay, we would adopt.
Mm-hmm.
But again, you have these preconceived ideas of the way your life is going to pan out. We'd have biological children and then we would adopt, and not realizing, well, actually, that was, now in hindsight, knowing that was never in the cards for us.
Yeah, I go back to what you said at the beginning of this segment here about how we're taught how not to get pregnant, but nobody ever talks about how difficult it can
Yeah.
be to get pregnant, and those feelings of desperation, helplessness. I spent a small period of time, 3 to 4 years in between the birth of my oldest and my second oldest, where that was my story for a few years. And many people, even listening to this, won't know that because I didn't talk about it. And there was miscarriage. There was, months of just tears and tears, and of just like, is this going to happen? What did I do wrong? And that isolation, I think, because you've, likely spoken to so many women now with your lived experience, that isolation takes an incredible toll on a woman's mental health.
Yeah, because every month I would start the month of thinking, this is a month, right? You're so hopeful, right? This is the month. Um, I had an app. I was tracking. I was peeing on ovulation sticks. I was following the recommendation. We were having intercourse every second day. that may sound fun when you're a teenager.
Mhm.
It's challenging when you're trying to build a career and you've immigrated to a new country. And you're doing all these things. And then at the end of the month, you're like, oh gosh, this is not our month again. And
Mm.
then you're like, okay, you have the breakdown. And then the following month, it's okay, we're going to be hopeful again. And at the end of the month, it's not even a month again. And those months became years for me.
Mhm.
And you can't help, it's just human nature to compare. And you think to yourself, and I would look at other women with 3, 4 kids, and I think, how does this happen so easily? Clearly, there's something wrong with me. I did something wrong. And that's when that shame and that guilt and that isolation really sets in. And that's when you think to yourself, well, how can I not do the very thing that I was created to do? And
Yeah.
that is to be a mom, right? And then you think to yourself, well, did I prioritize my career? Did I wait too long? You have all of these what ifs questions arising. And that's when I say going back again to the basics and realizing that my worth as a woman is not dependent on me having biological children. In the same instance, also realizing earlier on that my worth as a woman is not based on my marital status either. So I feel like those are such important components that need to be entrenched in women as well.
Absolutely. So was there a time in that 5 years leading up to, before you got pregnant with Aiden, where you hit like a rock bottom and you just, were in a really dark place?
Many times.
Mm-hmm.
5 years is a long time. 5 years is a really long time to live in a place of expectation and disappointment. And then thinking, I'm pregnant, and then you miscarry. And some of those miscarriages were in silence because I felt ashamed that I couldn't stay pregnant.
Mm.
And And so there were times I thought, I can't do this anymore. And that's where I really felt like my husband was supportive. And he's like, you just call it. I'm happy for it to be just us. And we can look at other options if that's something that you want. But there were times that were really dark where I thought, I can't go on living like this. Like I couldn't see beyond anything else besides, I want to be a mom. I want to be a mom. And I remember many times praying about this and being like, God, if this is not what you want for me, because clearly this is not working out, then take this deep desire that I have in my heart, take it away. Because this is so heavy and so hard for me right now that I can't see a way forward. And in honesty, there were times that I felt suicidal.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. It's a deep wound, especially that helplessness. And like you said, as a woman, it's like we're innately born to give life to another human. Um, but then again, the divine synchronicity of um, the ray of sunshine, Aiden, your ray of hope, comes along. So
Mhm.
let's talk about that journey. So you had a few miscarriages, and then you had the pregnancy with Aiden. So let's talk about
Yes.
that.
So Aiden is an adopted embryo. So after my third miscarriage, I really felt what I can only describe as surrender.
Mm.
Um, and saying this pursuit of having a biological child first is just not in the cards for us. And, you know, realizing that more than wanting a child that looked like my husband and I or had our characteristics and personality, it was the one to be a mom. Um, and so that's how we said, okay, well, let's pursue embryo adoption. And that's how we ended up with Aiden. And again, now in hindsight, Aiden was always meant to come to us.
Mm.
There's no doubt in my mind that, yeah, that he was always meant to be my son.
Yeah, do you believe that our kids choose us? That it's that divine synchronicity, right? Their
Yeah.
souls choose our souls.
We have a really good relationship with the biological donors of Aiden and their family. And what I love about the relationship that I have with her is she is so encouraging and so affirms it so much with there's just things that happen. And she's like, I don't know if I could have done what you were doing. And that just seeing how Aiden is thriving means that she just the one who said he is 100% your boy. Like there's no doubt about it. And so having that affirmation from her, and when I look at her kids, I see so much of Aiden in them and vice versa that yeah. But again, I often say you have crystal clear on a vision on mountaintops, but when you're in the valley, you can't see that, right?
Wow.
So there was no way of me reassuring myself when I was in those dark places that it was going to be okay.
Yeah.
But I think that's the lesson, and that's the reason why there's so much of power in sharing our stories, is that if you find yourself in the valley, it's going to be okay.
Yeah. And it doesn't feel like it, and it won't feel like it for a long time. And the life that we've envisioned, I love that what you said about like redefining what your vision was, and finding love and hope and all of the goodness in something that you could have never envisioned.
Because I mean, once I was pregnant with Aiden, I thought, okay, I'm pregnant. I'm now more than halfway. I'm now, 30 weeks. I'm bringing this baby home, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then to be catapulted into a completely different direction. I had a vision of what mothering was going to look like, of what I thought I was going to be as a mother. And that was not the journey that I have with Aiden. And so, also then realizing, okay, we've got to quickly pivot. I, often say I moved from the infertility roller coaster onto the disability NICU advocating roller coaster within a day.
Wow. And so let's talk about that. So it was something that was completely unexpected.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so having to,
But
sorry, go
mhm.
ahead.
No, yeah. So I often say that, I had a smooth sailing pregnancy until it wasn't smooth sailing, and then it really went pear-shaped quickly, from being in preterm labor to I'm now having this baby, to not getting the delivery and the care that I wanted during my delivery, and then Aiden to having the head trauma at birth, to we could possibly lose him in 2 days, like over a period of 2 days, and me thinking to myself, how did I get this far? Like, what is going on? How did I come this far to only lose my kid again?
Oh my gosh. I am just having this visceral feeling in my body, being a mother and imagining what that must have felt like. Although I've never had to be in your shoes, but knowing the depth of the love that one has for this little tiny human that you gave birth to, and then not knowing what the future brings. So how many days, what was the time frame there from the complex, the birth trauma to figuring it all out?
I think we're still figuring it out.
That's what I mean, right? It's like,
Yeah. So Aiden was in NICU for 2 months. But the first 2 days, it was really if he survives, because the head trauma was significant. He had an ischemic and hemorrhagic stroke, and he also had what they call a subgaleal bleed, where because of the extraction, because I eventually had a C-section, because of the extraction, there was a breakdown of the veins in the head, in the scalp, and so he was literally bleeding into his scalp, and so he had to have multiple blood transfusions, and so that just compounded, the stroke that he had, and And so a lot of the talk was if he survives, and then the other talk when we got to day 3, when I got to hold him, was, well, now that he survived, we're not sure about the quality of his life.
Mm.
And I think it must have been a few days after I was discharged after the C-section, I came home and I said to my husband, I'm not sure I can do what they're talking about. I had this idea. I'm a physician, but in
Mhm.
that time, my brain doesn't function that way. I'm catching on to words. I hear things I don't like. I hear things that really made me so scared. And even then, in a place of being educated in that field, I'm like, I don't have what it takes. I I this is not what I signed up for, is what my exact words were to my husband. This is not what I signed up for. I can't do this.
Mm.
And then realizing that as a parent and as a mom, you just step up and do what's needed for your child. We don't have a choice in the
Yeah.
children that we're given.
Yeah. Like, this is the game. Let's find a plan. What's the game plan? So what was it like? I was just thinking as I was listening to you speak there, looking at all this through the lens of a physician. I mean, knowing more than most people know when they're in that situation,
Mm.
the medical complexities. Did it make it easier, more difficult, like that you kind of knew, or was it a whole nother layer of fear then?
I feel in many ways it made it harder
Yeah.
because there's sometimes I would say this to someone who didn't quite understand, and they were like, okay, but without the complete understanding of what we were actually dealing with. So I feel like there is a level of, I want to say, there's a level of joy with a little bit of ignorance
Yeah.
in not fully understanding what we're getting into. But here, I remember the one neonatologist, she said, well, do you want to have a look at his MRI? I don't even know why I said yes, but I did. And I remember just looking at it and just being absolutely like, okay, I don't read MRIs every day, but I know what it's supposed to look like.
Mhm.
And I'm just seeing a lot of damage and realizing, oh wow, they're not exaggerating. Like, this is really significant. This is really bad. And then realizing at that point, making the decision that I would need to step in and be Aiden's mom and not Aiden's physician.
Wow. Oh, I just got goosebumps when I heard that.
And being able to separate myself from, there's a different way you look at patients as a physician, but there's a different lens that you view your child, with a sense of complete acceptance and love for who this little boy is.
Yeah. And then also, I think about all of the families that I have sat heart to heart with who have children with medical complexities who were told that something wouldn't be possible and that their son or daughter's life wasn't going to look like, dot,
Mm.
dot, dot. And they said, oh, well, let's just see. There's this lens from what medically would be possible to then the hope and courage and perseverance of love and faith and determination of a family and a mother to say, well, I don't know. Let's see.
Yeah,
Right. And
yeah,
that's your story. Because when I look at your sweet boy now, and I hear you talk about the level of damage after he suffered the strokes and the hemorrhaging, the brain bleeds. I cannot believe it.
yeah, yeah. And I think that was, again, when you go through those shifts, realizing, okay, I am going to step into being a mom,
Hmm.
but beyond that, I'm going to be a mom that, one, will advocate to no end for her child, but believe in the possibility for him. Because if I don't have that belief in him, who will?
Yeah. And that belief set the stage for the possibility,
Yeah.
right?
And realizing that we're going to do whatever we can for him. And And there's also, I mean, for me, a huge element of my faith in this,
Absolutely.
where I never ever want to say, yeah, I did this, I got this, I stepped into who I was and who I am. And there were many times that I was an absolute broken mess. And it was only my faith and belief in God that I'm like, you're going to carry me through this.
Mm.
Because I can't do this on my own. I've never done this. And so I'm going to trust that if you brought me here, that you're going to carry me through. And I feel like that's really where my husband and I just like kind of band together and we like, okay, we can do this, but we can only do this on the foundation of our faith. Because there would be days where he had a hard day and I felt stronger, or vice versa. And there were times when we were both on our knees, just like crying out, praying for wisdom and guidance for doing the right things. And so I always say that there's an element of with Aiden in our lives that is faith and science,
Yeah.
in that we pray, we ask for wisdom, and then we act and we do the next best thing. And Aiden, I feel, is really just the fruit of our belief and doing the next best thing.
Wow. And he's walking, he's running. Let's talk
He's
about some,
talking.
he's talking. Let's talk about some of those things, because for listeners who aren't aware of medical complexities when it comes to cerebral palsy and the spectrum, I think of maybe abilities, because it's very broad. Yeah. So let's kind of take the listeners through that a little bit. Like, what was expected that Aiden would be able to do or wouldn't be able to do?
So I think in the very beginning, like most of the times, and I never blame physicians or neurologists, and so there's never pointing a finger at it.
Right.
They just give you what they think is going to be the next, what it's going to look like. The scan looks like this, so we anticipate this. However, if you've met someone with cerebral palsy, you've met one person with cerebral palsy, because it's such a spectrum. And even people who have the same diagnosis of cerebral palsy, they too present in different ways. And so I remember the conversation with a neonatologist and a neurologist at the time, and they said, look, we would just keep your expectations realistic, in that we don't anticipate him having a really good quality of life. We don't anticipate him walking or talking because of the areas that are affected and damaged in the brain. However, they did preface it with saying, but we do know about neuroplasticity and the brain's ability to rewire itself. And so I remember that just sparking sort of like curiosity. I was like, okay, you've given me a little bit of hope that there is something that we can do
Yeah.
about it. And so when we started to notice that, okay, we are seeing the signs of cerebral palsy, and it was like, well, then we're just going to go really hard with early intervention. And then once again, discovering that what's provided really doesn't meet the requirements of where we would have Aiden reach his full potential, and realizing, okay, gosh, we got to pay out of pocket if
Yeah.
we're gonna do what we need to do for this child.
Yeah, and that's the reality of it. What's possible, but what's accessible are two different conversations, right?
Yeah. And that's the gap.
Yeah, that's again. I mean, as an educator and having seen many different layers of that in
Mhm.
different developmental stages of kids. I know that having family members who've had early intervention strategies and therapies that have been life-changing for them. I've seen it in real time. And so without you persevering and finding what was available and getting those therapies early, because let's talk a little bit about that neuroplasticity of the brain, which we always have,
Yes.
the opportunity to rewire, but it's most important and most powerful in those early years. Yeah.
Early years. Yep. And that's a critical part. And I think that's why there was such a sense of urgency um, for me in the beginning, because I knew, okay, I have a 5 to 6 year window period to maximize this kid's potential. And I often retell the story of taking Aiden for therapy, middle of COVID. So it was one parent to take him in. Um, and just the weight and the burden of having to do that. And we went really hard in the beginning. And having Aiden, who at that time was 6 months old, and corrected age being 4 months old, really, and having him crying in the therapy room with the physiotherapist and them just being rock stars and pushing it through and reassuring me, but me sitting outside that room crying because how could I do this to my baby? And I'm a first-time mom. I've gone through all of this. I have the support is my husband and I. We had no additional support to help us navigate this. We sleep deprived. We're doing all the things on our own and still trying to work at the same time. And I remember sitting outside that physiotherapy room crying because my son is inside crying. And I thought to myself, Alisha, you've got to just keep your perspective. I wanted to go in and just say, just stop what you're doing. It's okay. I'm just going to take him home and it's okay. We're going to stop this. But realizing I had to think about Aiden as a 25-year-old man, as a 30-year-old man, and ensuring that we were at least giving him an opportunity to explore his full potential, whatever that was going to look like. I had no idea. I mean, in my heart, did I feel and believe and trust and hope and pray that my son was going to walk and talk? Absolutely. Did I doubt it some days? Yes. But I had to hold on to that hope that he's going to walk, he's going to talk, and he is going to find his place and purpose in society. And so I just had to hold on to onto that on those days where it really got difficult and dark.
Because I imagine it got harder and harder until it got easier or until it got better, and to hold fast to that. Like, I love how you say that you had to put yourself into the future and thinking about doing this for Aiden's future self.
Yeah. And not living with any possible, I don't want to say use the word regret, but regret that I didn't do enough for him in the beginning when we could recruit as much of that neuroplasticity as we could.
Mm.
And again, it's not to negate any challenges that he might have growing up, because we know that there can be challenges and changes that he does face. But, now, again, almost in September, Aiden turns 4. But seeing him now and that hindsight, I would just keep reassuring myself that you're doing the right thing. And this is where, comes back to trusting your gut as a mom and advocating for your kid.
Yeah, because no one's doing it for you or doing it for them but and your
No.
husband, and no one has more of an invested interest and than a mother on a mission. So what do the therapies look like for him then? Occupational therapy, speech therapy?
So we started in the beginning with occupational and physiotherapy, and he would go every day. And some weeks we would do these intensives, which would be 10 hours of therapy. And so Aiden really continued with that right until he started with school full time. So right until he was 3, he did that. And so it took a lot of coordination, juggling between my husband and I to still keep ourselves functioning at work and being able to do that. And then he did a little bit of speech therapy, but as he started developing, we realized that it was less of a concern for him. And so then we were able to divert more of our resources into the areas that he needed.
And so during this entire time, from the time Aiden was born to today, both you and your husband are still balancing careers.
Yep. Yeah, we have transitioned and we have shifted and changed what those careers look like, but um, it's it's sometimes difficult as a parent. I think parenting on its own is a challenge, but realizing
Hardest
that,
thing ever, hardest thing. I just had this conversation with somebody the other day. I don't know. I don't know. It is a level of hard. Again, like they talk to us about how not to get pregnant, and they don't talk enough about how hard parenting really is.
yeah, and I often say that parenting is hard, but disability parenting or parenting a child with medical complexities is next level,
Yeah.
because we have all the concerns that you have about sending your kid to school. Are they going to make friends? Are they going to be included? But then I also have to think about the multiple medical appointments I need to get to, making sure that there's finances and funding for medication, equipment, therapy, forms, dealing with insurance. There's a lot of things that are added to the plate when you're dealing with a kid with a disability.
Yeah, and that many of us who aren't dealing with that, we just take for granted, that you're right. It's a next level hard that again, in order to have this context of understanding, you need to sit in the circles with other families, and listen and lean in and learn and see, because at any
Mhm.
given moment, you don't know what's around the corner. You don't know what's coming your way or your children's way. And so um, I think that's why I really value having these conversations as well, because it opens my eyes and my children's eyes, because, accessibility is something that we all take for granted.
Yeah.
Movement of our bodies with ease is something we all take for granted.
Mhm. And seeing Aiden work so hard in therapy to accomplish things that come so easy to other kids. And things that they said, weren't in the cards for him, it ignites a different sense, it ignites a different purpose and passion within us to then want to share our story.
Yeah. Yeah, because it also shares the possibility for other families and other kids, And so let's talk. This is a good segue into talking about then what you've created, from that learning curve, that very steep learning curve, for other families, the awareness, the work that you're doing. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, and so I think that, from our lived experience in realizing, okay, well, what is provided versus what is required, that gap, and realizing, gosh, like we need to do something about filling this gap and making sure that, you know, quality early intervention is not the exception, but a standard. And we are very early in our journey, but that is still our vision, and our mission is to create that change where parents who find themselves in a similar situation that we were in would not have to choose between therapy and groceries.
Yeah.
And so that was really the heart of why we created Hope for Cerebral Palsy, is to ensure that quality early intervention is accessible to families. And then, our secondary mission is the importance of creating inclusion and accessibility, and seeing people, children and adults who have disabilities as valued members of society.
Yeah. So the quality intervention is a standard, not an exception. That's a
Mhm.
powerful statement.
Yeah.
And I feel like in that, I mean, and this, there's a lot of work. You
Tell
know?
me about it.
I'm thinking, Alicia, how can I help you? Because it's going to take a village. It's going to take an army. It is going to take but there's so many. I just think about all the babies and all the families who wouldn't have access or ability or
Mhm.
opportunity, and then what that transcends to the kind of lives they lead.
Yeah, and also the component of awareness. And I think I think of the mom that's told, take your kid home and love them, and she does just that.
Mm. Yeah, because
And
awareness
that's
and the
and
opportunity to
that
know that there's a
scares,
possibility, right?
yes, and that is what scares me, is I think to myself, gosh, there's things that we can do to um to maximize that potential. And it's never about, we know that cerebral palsy has no cure. We know that, but we do know that there are gains to be made with early intervention. And I look at Aiden, and I see him really as a case study of what early intervention is, quality early intervention. And I understand in many ways we talk about coming from a disadvantaged background, but I do recognize the privilege that I have to be able to give that to my son, and realizing that from that place of privilege, being able to create something where it shouldn't have to be about privilege in giving that to all children
Yeah.
with that diagnosis.
So many layers to your story because, we speak now of the privilege that you have to be able to give that to Aiden, but there were times in your lives where you weren't in a place of privilege
No,
and
no.
you were judged and you had adversity. And so this kind of full circle story with all these layers, I think, brings with it so much inspiration, so much hope, um, awareness. And I just am so happy that our paths crossed because I want to be able to help you spread awareness, here on the platform, so that other families can know what is possible and what is available. And seeing Aiden now, tell us about that. Like what is Aiden like as a 4-year-old now?
Aiden is all joy, all joy. He is the happiest little boy, ambitious, inquisitive, tenacious, and and strong-willed. And it's that fine line in parenting as well, between seeing your very strong-willed kid and realizing that it's something I need to harness and not control too much, because I definitely feel that that is a quality in Aiden that is going to serve him well throughout his life. Um, and again, if I could ever go back in time and speak to that new mom who was sitting next to a NICU isolate and crying, I would say it's going to be okay.
Mhm.
It's going to be okay. And even today, that's life, right? There's a level of uncertainty in life just in general, and we don't know what the future holds. But when I see Aiden right now, I just see a little leader, and I just say that to my husband: we're raising a leader. We shouldn't. We need to harness the strong will and this ambition and this curiosity that he has. And I just see a change maker in so many ways. It's just he is a joy to raise.
Yeah. And that strong will kept him alive.
Absolutely. That
Yeah.
tenacity to go. I mean, just taking him to the playground, and my husband and I view everything like therapy. Like, okay, how do we get him to use both hands? How do we get him to climb, and being able to help him navigate all of those tricky situations, and seeing him climb, and he'll be like, he has the best self-talk, and he'll be like, I'm trying, I'm doing it, I can do it, don't give up, keep going. And I'm like, you're 3.5. You have better self-talk than a lot of adults.
I'm just thinking, how can we get him on the podcast? Can you imagine? It would be so fun to have a 4-year-old as a podcast guest.
Aiden's school teacher, she sent me this email and this video of another kid in the Trexo, which is a robotic walker. And he went along this kid in the Trexo because he used to use a Trexo at one point, and he held her hand and he said, I believe in you, you can do it. And I was just like, oh my goodness.
My heart. Well, listen, I mean, he came by that honestly from his mama and his dad, you know. And you can't give away something, our good friend Dr. Jody Carrington says this, you can't give away something that you've never, it's never been modeled to you or that you haven't learned in your upbringing. And so, he's just had the best role models to help him thrive and grow. And he just I mean, he sounds like, and when I see some of your social media with him, I just see that bright light. And that can't be taught, that is just like a sparky soul.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's the thing when you change the way you view people with disability, because at the end of the day, there's no two ways to slice it. Is a little boy with a disability, but it is changing the way society views people with disabilities,
Mm.
in that he has inherent worth and value uh, and purpose in his life. And and again, when you look at Aiden, it's undeniable that there's this joy and light in him that, I think to myself, yeah, this is who you're supposed to be.
Hmm. Yeah, nobody else. You're exactly who you're supposed to be.
You're exactly who you're supposed to be. But having that level of acceptance for every person we come across, right?
Absolutely. I love it. Oh my gosh. So many lessons learned today listening to you. You're stunningly beautiful. You are wise. Um, you've got this passion, perseverance, and spark in your own eye that just makes me want to be around you more. So I do hope our path
I'll keep you around. Keep all
around.
those compliments coming.
Well, where we met in person was, just a couple of months ago at the Love for
Mhm.
Lewiston event that Jess Jansen and her husband host, in memory of their beloved son, Lewiston. And since I've been following that community and learning more and getting to know some of those people, it's changed my life.
Mhm.
It's changed my life from this lens of privilege of being white, straight, able-bodied, um, to really leaning in and learning and listening and then sharing that with my kids.
Yeah, yeah. And that's such an important comment that you made, because inclusion and accessibility, or inclusion of people, it's something that's taught, and it's taught and modeled. So children who will grow up including people with disabilities because it's modeled by their parents. And it's a conversation that all parents need to have with their children.
Yeah. And because the kids know the way. The kids will lead us into the best parts of ourselves, from a place of joy and a place of acceptance. We have the learning to do as adults, I believe. So thank you for being a teacher of that to us, and for sitting heart to heart with me today. Where can listeners find you, learn more about your foundation, the work you're doing?
So you can find me on my website, dralisharai.com. Our nonprofit's website is hopeforcerebralpalsy.com. And then I'm on Instagram.
Okay.
And yeah, my handle is Dr. Alisha Rai.
And I will link those all in the show notes. So thank you, Heart Talkers, for tuning in today with Dr. Alisha and I for this emotional but impactful and powerful conversation. This is one that I won't forget. So thank you. Thanks, Alicia, so much for sitting heart to heart.
Oh no, thank you so much.